Alright guys, moving on to part 3 of Return to the Greatest Comic Haul, if you will. And what we're going to be hitting here is Marvel Tales and Marvel Team Up and Spider-Man. Basically, this is all the Spider-Man. I'm going to go ahead and tell you I got some Spider-Woman, but I don't want these videos to run too long, so we'll just get right to it. What we have here, now again, for you guys that have popped up in here and haven't been following it, this should be part of a playlist I'm making. Hopefully I'll put some links up, who knows. And but basically, a guy who watches my channel, and he has his own channel, got a hold of me on Facebook, told me he had some Conan books and stuff that he wanted to give me, and turned around and it ended up being over 650 comics. And this is me showing you what's in there. So these were all free, and I'm just real grateful, still blowing my mind, and I went through all these and got them organized and everything. But anyway, this is part 3 of hopefully a playlist. Alright, so what we got here is Marvel Tales from the 70s. Marvel's Tales actually was a book that started in the 60s, but my experience with the books that it's always been reprints of Spider-Man books. And this one starts out, this is issue 76 of Marvel Tales. This is Stan Lee and John Romita Jr. stories. I don't know what issue they start around. Some of these I'll be able to recognize and won't be able to recognize. But for example, this is Spider-Man number 96. Okay, the good thing about Marvel Tales is that they always told you what the issue was. And I tell you what, man, any Spider-Man with Ditko, I think are fantastic. And when Romita came on there with his clean style, and they started bringing in Gwen and Mary Jane. Gwen Stacy and Mary Jane and all that stuff, I'm a sucker. These are the Spider-Man books that I read when I was a kid, when I was starting out in comics. My stepdad had a whole bunch of comics from the 60s and the 70s, and he was still buying all these magazines and little, pulp books and everything like that. And so I was reading like Silver Age books and Bronze Age books when I was like 4 years old. I mean, we're talking, I've been reading comics since '77. And seeing these things blow my mind. I remember having the original of these that were my stepdad's and my uncle's. My uncle also collected comics, and it was all Conan and stuff, and Jack Kirby and Commandy. But here we go. We got the reprint of 121 and 122. I think those are the numbers. But this was the epic death of Gwen Stacy story. What's cool about the biggest part of this collection that I've been given is that a lot of these books are a reprint or the actual issues, and I've been running across some Thors and stuff in the early 70s. It's when Stan Lee, who had been writing, well, that's debatable, but we'll just say steering the ship of Marvel, keeping everything straight, was kind of stepping down from Thor and Spider-Man, and I think he'd stepped down to Roy Thomas long before this on the Avengers, and he was coming off of Fantastic Four, and you had guys coming on here that were starting to take these characters in different directions for the Bronze Age. Gary Conway took over Spider-Man. A lot of these are Gary Conway issues. Gil Kane came on the art, and a lot of big stuff happened, like the death of Gwen Stacy, the clone stories. With Thor, they started, Roy Thomas came on there, Lynn Wein, a lot of people came on. Here's a reprint of Spider-Man 129, The Punisher, and I remember as a kid, my stepdad had this one. So we're in the 130s now, late 120s to 130s with Spider-Man. But it was just a really cool time to read those comics in the Bronze Age, because like I said, I kind of lucked up reading, Silver Age X-Men, Fantastic Four and stuff for Marvel and stuff, and then at the same time getting to read these Spider-Man books. They had a different feel. There's a lot of people who'd grown up on comics that weren't ashamed to be in comics, and they just started really taking these characters in places, different places. I personally prefer the Bronze Age. I think the Bronze Age is probably the best era for Marvel when it comes to comics. And then on the flip side of that, DC did a whole bunch of great things in the 80s with Watchmen, Dark Knight, Crisis on Infinite Earth and stuff coming up. John Byrne on Superman, I like that. But I think it was the 90s is actually when DC's Vertigo and some of their other titles actually went in the right direction, like with Starman and stuff. Not saying it was great stuff. I mean, I'm sitting here showing Spider-Man comics and talking about DC, but that's the whole thing. But I think the 70s Bronze Age is my favorite Marvel stuff because of where Spider-Man was going. It was hit or miss. I mean, it wasn't all classic. They brought in the Spider-Mobile that Human Torch decided to make him. Some Mysterio. You know, it's kind of like these characters had already been established. They've been in a rotation. I'm not saying they were going stale, but all of a sudden these guys get these characters and they go to different places and they take chances and see some stuff. Then we bring in Gwen Stacy clone coming in. Returned to Scorpion and start bringing in May Parker, brought in some Inhumans. I mean, I remember reading these. And for some reason, I actually think that's Peter Parker #1. I'm not sure if that's an actual Amazing Spider-Man reprint. We're up to 124, and we've entered the 80s. Marvel Tales has entered the 1980s. But I could be wrong, you know, because all of a sudden, you know, there's the Jackal, and the Jackal brought in all the Spider clones and stuff. I've actually got this actual issue. I also have, I should have said it before I was talking, but I also got the second appearance of the Punisher in Spider-Man. I've got the actual issue. I also have, this is 159. This book was actually hot during the 90s. I think it's still sort of a hot book. And somewhere on the line, one of these books should say something about Spider-Man being a TV sensation because he actually had a TV show, which was like a series, a couple mini-series, you know, bless their hearts, in the 70s, which was not bad. Alright, yeah, to bring in the Sandman with that classic Kirby costume when he was in the Frightful Four. Hammerhead and Doc Ock, you know, giving Aunt May hell. I remember this. This is harking back to, like, I don't know, Amazing Spider-Man 33 with that cover. Anytime he's covered in water down in the sewer, you got to go back to, you know, that classic moment. And I'm not going to go into it. Just know what it is. The Shocker cracks me up because there's an urban legend. You know, his whole power, you know, he's the Shocker, but it's basically vibrations and stuff. And you got to look real close. They blocked it, but you can look up the character. He had a V on his belt buckle. And his things were vibrations, so there's an urban legend saying that his name was originally the Vibrator, which has been denied by Marvel. You know, he's got a V on his costume. Well, let me look at this. The Shocker just cracks me up. His costume actually makes a V on the chest where the yellow is, you know, to the brown. Coming up out there, he's got a V on his belt buckle. But he's not the Vibrator. He's the Shocker. Alright, that's the Marvel Tales. Now we're going to Marvel Team Up. Are they showing up? Yes, they are. That looks like, I almost thought that was a Ditko cover, but it's not. It's an Al Milgrom cover. Whoops, sorry. But Marvel Team Up Annual #2. Never read this. Don't know what to tell you. But it's Spider-Man and the Hulk. And I'm one of those guys, for some reason, I would love to see more of Spider-Man and Hulk interacting. I don't know what it is. One's angry. And I mean the traditional Green Hulk and stuff. You know, Spider-Man's all bouncy and, you know, laughable and stuff. And the Hulk's all, you know, leave me alone kind of thing. Grumpy. They're pretty good opposites. Number 49, Spider-Man and Iron Man. I've read some of these over the years. 59, Spider-Man, Yellow Jacket, and the Wasp. Apparently there's an insect theme going here. I'd laugh my butt off if they end up having the Swarm, the guy made out of bees, as the villain. You know, it'd be funny. I think this is a John Byrne, between the Pharaoh and the Force. Spider-Man and Havoc. Spider-Man and Daredevil. I really wished I'd gotten in here and see who'd done these. Keith Pollard and Bob McLeod. Power Man, Spider-Man and Power Man. I'm expecting a lot of this stuff to start actually kind of gaining some value now with the Netflix TV series of Daredevil, Power Man, Iron Fist, and Alias, and the rumored Doctor Strange, you know, movie mixed up here with Spider-Man. You know, I can see people being fans of the movies and being like, oh, they're all together, and being surprised. Guys, people haven't really followed comics. Spider-Man and Miss Marvel, Spider-Man and Wonder Man. And let me tell you something. I'm one of those guys. Oh my God, I'm going the Griffin. The Griffin. He actually ended up, you know, looking like this, and they in the comics over years he morphed into an actual Griffin, to the point that Namor was writing him when John Byrne did that book in 90. But I've always kind of been a fan of the Griffin, just because there's nowhere else this would have worked but comics. You know, just a cool character. You know, Spider-Man Red Sonja. I don't know if John Byrne did the interiors, but I definitely love that cover. I'm a huge Frank Thorne Red Sonja fan. That era, Roy Thomas, Frank Thorne, and to see John Byrne doing her when he was just, you know, getting attention and just kicking butt left and right. He could do no wrong there for a couple years. Spider-Man, Doctor Strange, and Clea. Spider-Man and Satana. Hope these are showing up. Spider-Man and the Black Widow, again with an insect theme, cracks me up. Spider-Man and Nick Fury with the Black Widow, Silver Samurai, and Boomerang in there. Slaughter on 10th Avenue. That's actually catching my eye. Rich Buckler did that cover. That's the guy that draws Astro City now. Superman and Master of Kung Fu. We've still got to be in the 70s. Yeah, we're in 1979. Shane Chai. Oh, I used to know some trivia on his book, because his book was, I don't know, they just continued the numbering from whatever the series was before he took over. And then we got Shane Chai, Black Widow, Nick Fury, so it looks like they had some kind of continuity going on there with the Silver Samurai still. So apparently this started on 10th Avenue, and this is making me think it was an ongoing story. I don't remember Marvel Team Up doing that, but like I said, we're in 79, I don't remember these being in my house. I've got a couple copies of this, Spider-Man and the Guardians of the Galaxy. Spider-Man and the Black Panther, that's always good. Spider-Man and the Invisible Girl, before she became the Invisible Woman. Spider-Man and Nightcrawler, they're both two wall-crawling freaks, if you will. Spider-Man and the Beast, looks like we were doing some X-Men themes here. Death Rides the Airwaves, this is number 90. That kind of reminds me of the Superman Spider-Man cover that they did in the Treasury edition of Spider-Man and Superman meeting. I've just read too many comics over the years. Carnival of Fear, Spider-Man and Ghost Rider. That's the Ghost Rider I like, right there. Spider-Man and Hawkeye, looks like they're scared to death. They're cowards because they're going against Mr. Fear. Spider-Man and the Werewolf, there you go, against the Tatterdemalion. Oh man, that looks awesome. That is a really good cover. I like the use of blacks. It's very Bernie Wrightston-like. Trying to see if they got credits that he did it. I don't know. I'm going to definitely go back and look at that one. Spider-Man in the Shroud. That's kind of like their answer to the Green Hornet. I think he acted like he was a bad guy, but he's really a good guy. Hulk and Spider-Woman Marvel Team Up. That's interesting. No Spider-Man in that one. And then the Black Widow's back with Spider-Man. Spider-Man and Machine Man. There you go. Spider-Man and Nighthawk. So people don't realize is Nighthawk started out, and I think he still is Marvel's take on Batman, actually, in their universe. Spider-Man and Doc Samson. That's a lazy cover. Al Milgrom figures. Spider-Man and Ant-Man. Number 103. Looks like I love who they're going against here. The Taskmaster. Kind of a Neil Adamish kind of cover there. Oh. Alright, Spider-Man and Captain America. Spider-Man and She-Hulk. She-Hulk debuted in number 1. Stan Lee actually in her own series, I think in 1980. This is 1981, so she's still running around in the ripped clothes and stuff. Stan Lee wrote her first appearance, I think. The Paladin. Don't know what to say. Got the Dazzler. Apparently they didn't know disco was dead and they were having no BG weekends on the radio. I remember that promise on the radio spots. There'll be no BGs over the weekend. I was like, that's mean, you know. I like the BGs. Okay, Spider-Man and Iron Man. Looks like a Bob Layton cover. Bob Layton, one of the greatest Iron Man artists. That's a Mike Zeck cover, man. Spider-Man and the Falcon. First African-American hero in comics. Spider-Man and Thor. Bob Layton doing the covers again, 115. The Valkyrie with the Thor. So it makes sense for those two to meet. They're both Norse. Oh my gosh. Bob Layton, not the greatest Wolverine artist ever. He always, I don't know where he got this idea that, you know, it looks like he made his Wolverine's claws look like, you know, kitchenware. I don't know. Alright, Spider-Man and Professor X. Spider-Man and Daredevil. This is probably like the third copy of this. Ed Now. I thought it might have been a cover. Spider-Man and Frogman. I've always been kind of curious about this. Spider-Man and Kitty Pryde. And it ends with Spider-Man and 150. And this is one of those books that's like an album of Peter Frampton alive in the 70s. Seems like everybody had this, you know. And if I'm remembering right, that is a Barry Windsor Smith cover, but I think Greg LaRocque did the art inside of it. I gotta see if I'm right. Oh man, this has never been opened. Well, it hasn't been opened in a long time. That tape's all yellow. Alright, so Marvel Tales 150. I can't remember what they were canceling this to start Web of Spider-Man. Yep, Louis Simonson and Greg LaRocque. Yeah. But they canceled they canceled Marvel Team Up to bring us Web of Spider-Man. They canceled Brave and Bold to bring us Batman and the Outsiders. And anytime a book is canceled, you need to look around the corner and see what started then. You know. All right, and then we get more into the 90s. You know, some of these books I've already got a bunch of these, but here is you know, Spider-Man number 13. Todd McFarlane got his own series to do. He wrote and drew it, and he was begging for help in the letters columns. Anybody that bashes the writing on McFarlane's run of Spider-Man, they had that right. But if you go back and read the letter columns, Todd McFarlane was begging you to tell him what can he do to improve. I'm not saying that's a good or a bad thing, but for a man who's willing to take critique and put himself out there, as nasty as people can get, you know, good for him. You know, Subsidy brought out Morbius. I can't remember one drink. Anyway, then he left the title. Eric Larson took over, just like he ended up taking over on Amazing Spider-Man. And this is a really underrated run by Eric Larson, man. He did Revenge of the Sinister Six. Now, it's been over 20 years since I've read this, but I remember his art. This seems like his art. I mean, he was in a no-win situation, you know. If he comes in and does Spider-Man like McFarlane, he gets bashed. If he doesn't do it like McFarlane, he gets bashed, you know. He also followed Todd McFarlane on The Incredible Hulk for an issue. It seems like he was the go-to guy when McFarlane left the book, bring in Larson. But this book, his artwork really went up a notch. I mean, he was really, I feel like he worked his butt off. And I really like to get the rest of this story. It was a 6-part story, I think. Here's 19, part 2. I don't remember. But I remember buying these, and I'm like, oh my God, this is actually better. Then we get number 26 with the hologram cover. It's not going to show up. Then we're in 1999, where Howard Mackey somehow ended up writing both Peter Parker and The Amazing Spider-Man. They both had new number 1s. This is Peter Parker Spider-Man. There's apparently the Sunburst variant cover, and then you had the regular cover. John Romita Jr. was doing the art. John Byrne was doing the other one. Then we jump back a little bit to 1996, but in the 90s, between the Clone Wars and I think the Carnage Wars or whatever the hell's going on, and the books really went downhill really bad. Marvel had this attitude, it doesn't matter, because we will put, anything we put Spider-Man on will sell. And then they started having all their artists start drawing like image guys. This is Luke Ross, but they got him drawn like McFarlane, except with feet. They were telling these guys to do that on purpose. Marvel was never the followers. They were the innovators, the house of ideas. And that's why, 90s were rough. But anyway, they actually had it to where in the 70s, Gary Conway wrote the story where Spider-Man versus Spider-Man. He was fighting his clone. And, I saw it in the Marvel Tales. But they actually came up with the idea that Spider-Man's clone came back, and they were actually playing with the idea that Ben Reilly, the clone, was actually the real Peter Parker, and for over 20 years we've been reading the clone stories of Spider-Man. All those issues would have been shit, But anyway, they finally listened to the fans after all the uproar and just the terrible stuff that was going on, and they did this story called Revelations, where you come to find out that they finally put the Ben Reilly guy to rest, the Scarlet Spider guy, the climax. Come to find out that he was the clone, and it was the Green Goblin behind all of this to mess with him. He never died. He had heart surgery and went to Europe. Had sex with, he was actually, Gwen Stacy was cheating on Peter with the Green Goblin, and Straczynski wrote it where they had kids together. That it was just a mess. I can go on and on. Then we're back here with looks like an Eric Larson issue here of Amazing Spider-Man 350, 351. I think they started doing this. Spider-Man started getting cosmic powers, and he was getting Captain Universe powers. That was a big mystery. Then we go to the Round Robin, the Sidekick's Revenge story. Mark Bagley came on here. This is around 91, and they started bringing in all these street level characters and stuff. And I remember reading 2 issues of this, and it didn't really stand out. I don't remember what was going on. I don't know. Anyway, but it ended up like 358 with this great big huge, whatever. And then we get into this. Now is it this issue? I think it is. These aren't in order. This is the Child Within story. Now, going to go back to Craven's Last Hunt. For you guys that don't know what that is, go look it up. But it was a grim and gritty story of Craven hunting down Spider-Man to prove that he could beat him, and Craven actually became Spider-Man. And it ended with, I'm not going to spoil it, but it had a very dark ending. And James DeMantis wrote it. But what that was really about was that was a story that James DeMantis wanted to do about Batman and the Joker, but DC said no. I can't remember why. They had a story going on that was kind of similar to it, or the movie, Batman movie was coming out. I don't know. They didn't let James DeMantis do it. So they turned around and he took it to Marvel, and he ended up tweaking it to be a Spider-Man Craven story. Now, years later, he ended up doing a run on the Dark Knight books. Batman Legends, Batman Dark, I don't know what it was, but it was called Joker Going Sane. It was a story called Going Sane. That was the original story, so that ties into Craven's Last Hunt. And this is the sequel. The Child Within is the sequel. This is the story of Vermin. Vermin was one of the first guys that Craven freaking beat the shit out of in the, Vermin's like a rat, half man, half rat kind of guy. Hangs out in the sewers, kind of like a, genetic mishap. Vermin. His name is Vermin. I hope I got it right. But this is the sequel to Craven's Last Hunt, The Child Within, which I find really interesting. So, that's kind of cool. But yeah, these are all the Child Within Aftermath. And Sal Buscema did some really good stuff. Then we come to Web Spinners #1. I'm glad this was in there because it's, this is 1999, and it's a freaking John Romita senior cover. And Mike Zulli, an artist in here, was actually kind of hot because of some of the work he did on Neil Gaiman's Sandman. So anyway, I hope I kept it interesting. That's the Spider-Man books, and I'm going to move on to part 4.